In today's video, we're going to take a look at ArkOS, which is a custom firmware that's been made for the Anbernic RG503. You may have heard of it before, and that's because it's been used on other Rockchip 3326 devices like the RG351 series. So I'll go over how to install ArkOS onto your RG503 device, and then I want to look at some game performance on ArkOS, particularly on titles that didn't work so well on stock OS. And then I want to go over some features of this custom firmware like the Screensaver feature and also some of the themes that you get pre-installed on ArkOS. So there are many things to note about ArkOS. The first is that it's highly customizable, and that means that there are a lot of little things that you can tweak about the operating system and also the emulation front end, so you'll be able to get it looking as you like it. The second thing about ArkOS is the game performance, and we'll put this to the test and we'll see if there are any games that didn't work so well previously work a little bit better now. The third thing is there are online updates, so you don't have to download it onto your computer and then put that onto your handheld. You can just download it via Wi-Fi. And last but not least, it's easy to use and also easy to install as well, which is one of the main reasons why I like using this firmware. So the first thing you want to do is download the files for ArkOS, and you go to this GitHub page. I'll leave a link in the description below, and you go to the download links here and download the RG503 test image. Next, if you scroll up a little bit, there are instructions for loading, and I would recommend just following the instructions here rather than this video because the instructions may change at a later date. Once you have the file, just go ahead and unzip that. You can just use 7-zip. Next, you want to mount this image that you've just unzipped, and I've used a program called Rufus, and you can just follow the options that I've selected here. Also, I'm using a 32GB SanDisk MicroSD card for the ArkOS installation. And then I'm going to use a bigger MicroSD card, a 64GB card that I'm going to use for storing my ROMs, and I'm going to use that in the second MicroSD card slot. So now all you have to do is take out that micro SD card that you've got ArkOS copied onto and then put that into the first slot of the RG503. And then all you have to do is turn the system on, and then it's going to install itself. Super easy to use. So once it reboots, it's pretty much ready to use. Now this is the default theme, which is ES-Theme Nesbox, and there are other themes that are installed, and we'll look at those a little bit later in this video. So if you're like me and you want to use the second micro SD card slot for ROMs, then you want to go into the options and then turn that on. So if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll see switch to SD2 for ROMs, and then it's just going to copy some folders and point ArkOS to that second micro SD card slot. So the first thing I did after installing ArkOS was to check out the game performance of some of the titles that didn't work so well on the stock firmware. And we're going to start off with some Dreamcast titles. The first one is Virtua Tennis. Now I didn't show this in my previous Dreamcast video, but I had just played it by myself off camera, and the performance wasn't that great. And with ArkOS, it's not that much better here. So it's still more or less the same speed in terms of performance, so it feels like it's just a little bit slow. So the next game is Virtua Tennis 2 or Tennis 2K2. Now this was a title that I did show in my Dreamcast video and it didn't play that well. And once again, ArkOS doesn't seem to improve this and it's pretty much the same performance. So I don't know if you guys can actually see that this game is actually running slow, but I can tell you that if you play Virtua Tennis World Tour on PSP and then you come back and play Virtua Tennis 2 on Dreamcast, then you'll definitely be able to notice the difference. So I tested 11 games for Dreamcast and only one of them didn't work that well, which was Virtua Tennis 2. So that's all the retesting I did, so let's move on to some PSP games. And we'll start off with Hot Shots Golf. Now on stock firmware, the performance was okay. The only problem was that the power meter would cause problems with the gameplay, and sometimes the screen would go black, and then there'd be other times where the power meter would flicker and it would make it almost unusable. And I did try to go into the settings to fix this, but whatever I did didn't seem to work. So it could be an issue where it could be a problem with the Rockchip processor, because I actually tried this on the Odin handheld and that has a Snapdragon 845 and that seemed to work fine. But on the other hand, it is a much stronger processor, so that could have had something to do with it. But either way, Hot Shots Golf doesn't seem to work very well on the RG503. So we haven't had much luck with game performance on ArkOS, but one game that did work much better was Little Big Planet. Now this was a game on stock firmware that had dips down to about 20 FPS. On ArkOS, the game is at around 30 FPS the majority of the time, so the game plays pretty much as it should. And honestly, that's great news because that means that there is a game performance reason to install ArkOS on your RG503. As you can see in this side-by-side footage, there are moments where it dips down to around 20 FPS on stock OS, whereas on ArkOS on exactly the same location, it's still at around 30 FPS. The next game I'm retesting is Burnout Legends. Now on stock firmware, the performance was pretty up and down, so there would be some sections where it'd be 30 FPS, but then there would also be other sections where it'd go down to around 20 FPS, and even as low as 15 and 10 FPS at times. On ArkOS, as you're seeing now, the game would be at around 30 FPS most of the time, and it would dip down to around 24 FPS and as low as about 20 FPS. So I do feel like after playing a couple of laps of Burnout Legends that the performance is slightly improved, although it's still not perfect. So you're not going to be getting rock solid 30 FPS the whole way through, but I think it could be playable enough where if you really must play Burnout Legends that you could do it on ArkOS on the RG503. You do have to put up with some drops in the frame rate if you're going to play it on this device. Finally, with something like Wipeout Pulse, this was just something that needed a much faster processor. On the stock firmware, it was around about 20 FPS most of the time, although it could get up to 30, but most of the time it was at around 20. And then on ArkOS, we see that the performance hasn't really changed that much, so it's still hovering at around 20 FPS most of the time. Okay, let's go through some features of ArkOS, and there's one that I really like, which is the Screenscraper, and that's going to scrape online for all of your Gamebox media, screens and videos that you can use on your handheld. So the first thing you want to do is to turn on your Wi-Fi if you haven't already done that yet. So go ahead and do that, and then you want to press the start button to get into the menu and then go to the scraper option. If this is the first time you're using this scraper, you want to go to this website screenscraper.fr and then register a new username and password. And then once you do that, then you come back here and enter that username and password in. And then you're going to select the options that you want to scrape, things like if you want to scrape screenshots or videos or box art, then you want to select those options. And then at the bottom there, you just go to scrape now. And then after that, depending on how many games that you've got, then it's going to take some time to download all of that. So just set it aside for a little bit and then go ahead and wait for that to finish. If you're using the default theme, you may need to go back into the theme configuration and turn on a different game list view style. So you'd want to turn the detailed game list view style. And then that way, once you exit out of that, then you'll be able to see all of the screenshots and videos that you've downloaded. So with the video clips that you downloaded, these are actually 30-second video clips, and you can actually use this as a screensaver. So go into the menu and then go into the screensaver settings, and then you want to turn the screensaver behavior to random videos. And this way you can use this as a screensaver anytime you want, and you can press the select button to scroll through all of the different games that you've got, and then you can also press the start button to actually start playing that game. So the last thing I want to show you is the themes, and there are a bunch of pre-installed themes that come with ArkOS, and I'm just going to let the rest of this video play out because most of this is pretty much self-explanatory. And I hope you've enjoyed this video on ArkOS, and if you haven't already, make sure to check out my other Anbernic RG503 videos. There's a first look and unboxing video of this device, and there's also videos of PSP games and Dreamcast games running on this as well. So that's going to be it for this one. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one.